Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Thank you for taking the time to come and be part of TEDx Noah Libraries 2020. All around our region and state, across the country and around the globe, people just like you and me are hungry for ideas and information. We all want to know more, to imagine, and to understand. And TEDx events are organized to provide opportunities to connect us with ideas worth spreading. The TED organization has granted a license allowing Snow Libraries to independently organize this local TEDx event. Because at its core, your public library is all about providing you access to ideas and information. We've worked with some amazing individuals from our region to share some of these ideas with you. Now, the really hard work to make this happen has come from each featured speaker and all those who've worked behind the scenes. So we invite you to sit back and imagine you are sitting in the largest theater ever. In this virtual space, we are choosing to be safe, exercising our social distance, and other members of the audience are also choosing to be present. We are all expectant, ready to think deeply, and we are reimagining the quantum connections between ideas and realities. And now, on with the show.
Hi, and welcome to TEDx Snow Isle Libraries 2020. I'm your host, Phil Klein, and in this online event, we'll be premiering a TEDx talk and holding a conversation with the speaker to dig deeper into their ideas for greater understanding. With me are also a team of moderators and a co-host to provide any support we may need. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. Throughout this hour, you are also invited to ask questions in the comments sections of the Zoom webinar or in the YouTube Live or Facebook Live streams, wherever you may be. We do hope to respond to as many of your questions as possible. And if something strikes you or inspires you, please feel free to share that as well. I am here today with Chris Collier. He is a soft-spoken man, but he carries big data. And he has a lot to share about a critical issue in our communities, the need for affordable housing. As program manager of Alliance for Affordable Housing, Chris has been steeped in these questions and issues for a long time now. Chris, welcome. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you to start why it was you felt it was important to give this talk. What was it that really kind of inspired you to think, I need to share this?
Well, the real inspiration for this actually comes from many places, one of which is the introduction video that the audience just watched, and that's the need for conversation about this issue and to use your voice on this issue in housing and how do we make housing more affordable for more people. And it's something that in my daily life, I often encounter how much people don't understand, don't feel that their voice matters in this issue. But on reflection, I realized your voice, everyone's voice in this issue really matters. Everyone has experience that they can bring to the table. Everyone lives somewhere in some circumstance, and that experience brings really validates their voice in contributing to this issue. And it's really important to hear from everyone, to have a conversation about housing. And that's the need that we have, because people often don't understand how important their voice is in this issue, and often don't use it. And that is the need that I identified, and where I want to connect with people is the value in sharing your voice on the issue of housing and housing affordability.
That sounds really like a really important point for us to kind of really let register. So let's go ahead and listen with our voices at the ready to respond afterwards, and think about how we can start to figure out where each of our voices deserves a place in this conversation. Let's go ahead and watch your talk.
Today, we need to talk about housing. We need to talk about housing because every single day in our communities, housing is becoming less and less affordable, less and less attainable to more and more households. Households that might be our friends, our family, our coworkers, or people that we rely on to make our communities, our societies run, work, and be vibrant and strong. This is something that I encourage you to think about, even if you are living in a home that you've paid off the mortgage on. You're paying off the mortgage without issue. This is something that I encourage you to think about, because if you care about the environment, improving our healthcare system, improving our education system, addressing social inequities in our society, I encourage you to think about this, because if you don't have housing that is affordable, it is so much harder to address those issues and so many more that we all care about, that our communities care about. So I encourage you to stick around and take a listen, if that's the case. The second thing is, as much as this talk relies on data and information from Snohomish County, Washington, this is something that applies throughout Washington State, throughout the country, with different numbers and different stories. This is something that you will find to be true in your community, no matter where you are. So again, please stick around and take a listen. With those two things said, I want to show you some pictures of housing. I want to show you this photo just to get you thinking about what a home looks like, what you would be comfortable with seeing next to you in your neighborhood, in your city, in your town, whether in the downtown core or on the outskirts or somewhere in between. What do you want to have next to you? Would you be comfortable with this house? What about this? Or fourth and finally, this. I'll come back to these photographs and really why I'm showing them to you, but I wanted now to get you thinking about homes and their form, their shape, and our comfort level with what we build and where we live. With that out of the way, let's get to the data. Let's get to the data that shows we have a housing problem in our community. This bar chart really is where everything starts. The green bars, year by year, are the difference between new housing units we built and new households that were established every single year. In 2010, we built over 2,000 more units of housing than new households were established. That 2,000 unit difference in 2010 added to a total surplus of housing of 7,200 that we had accumulated from 2000 to 2010. So we had lots of housing available for people to choose from, whether rental or to own. We had lots of choices. We see that in 2000, this surplus continues, even if 1 or 2 years we have more households than new units are built, we have a surplus. We've always had a surplus. As much as I start counting at 0 in the year 2000, if you take this data back to 1980, we've always had a surplus. Always. Until 2014, 2015, 16. What happens? We plummet into the negatives year over year that wipes out any surplus of housing stock, any availability of housing stock in our community, in Snohomish County. What happened? What happened is simply a lot more households were established than new housing units were created, were built. We've never seen this before. Never In over 30 years of data, we've never seen something like this happen. The effects of this are profound. This red line that just came up is the inflation adjusted. I want to emphasize that. Adjusted to 2019 dollars, adjusted for inflation, median sale price of a single family home, townhome, and condominium all together. You see that in 2006, 2007, prices were quite high. In retrospect, that shouldn't have been, because we had lots of housing stock, lots of housing choices to go around. Economics 101 says you shouldn't have prices rising if there is plenty of surplus good housing to go around. And in retrospect, that was true because we experienced the recession in 2008 and onward. Now, home prices have exceeded their 2007 peak. Now, home prices are so high for a very different reason. Because that blue bar in the background, our housing stock, our housing availability, is gone. It's all used up. We don't have enough left. We don't have enough for new people coming here to occupy. And so people bid up the price of homes. They bid up the price of rentals. Rental prices are on this same trajectory. So the median sale price is important, but it's not really the determinant of being able to access housing. Because after all, most households finance their purchase of a home with a home loan from a bank. The bank really cares about what you make, how much money you make, to determine if you are a good investment, if you will be able to pay back that loan that they give you. That is represented by this brown line. As you would expect, this tracks pretty closely with the sale price. That's the biggest determinant of how much money you need to make, and also interest rates and property taxes and so on. This is the typical loan. Given typical loan terms, this is what you need to make on this median home. Again, adjusted for inflation. So if that's what you need to make, the next logical question is, well, how much do we make? How much does the median family make? That is this purple line. The answer is not enough, to be quite blunt. Adjusting for inflation, the required income and the median income for a family were almost identical, $84,000 and $83,000 respectively in the year 2000. And look at how much they've diverged since then, to the tune of almost $30,000, over $30,000. That's the difference that we've never seen before in Snohomish County. And we're paying for it. Because think about who makes below $89,000 in your community. I can tell you in Snohomish County, that includes sheriff's deputies, police officers who make $85,000 a year on average, firefighters who make around $80,000 a year, your middle school teachers, your pharmacy technicians, your dental assistants, so many jobs that we rely on, that we need, occupations and professions that make our communities, our society run, to say nothing of the service industry, your hairstylist, barista, grocery store clerks, and so many more, make so much less than what they need to access even the median house in our communities. This is something that I want to pause on to give us all time to reflect on. Who we know that is affected by this is represented in these numbers. And then let's talk about solutions. Because I hope at this point you're saying, Chris, I really need a solution right now. I could really use some hope and some optimism that something can be done to address this gap, this huge gap between what you need and what we actually make. And there is something we can do. There's something that you can do. There's two things that you can do, actually. The first thing is you need to think about, what does a home mean? What does a home look like? What are we comfortable with? I want you to think about if you're comfortable with these homes being your neighbors that I showed you earlier. Because none of these homes are single-family homes. The first one, that's a duplex. Second, that's courtyard apartments. Third, that's cottage housing. And fourth, that's live-work. That's a residential unit on top of a commercial first floor. Think about if you would be comfortable with this being your neighbor, the family or families that live there being your neighbors. The reason that I'm presenting this as a solution is because we can't have these housing types in our communities by and large today. In Snohomish County, over 60% of our residentially zoned land area is exclusively reserved for a single-family home. Let me say that again. Over 60% of the residential land area in Snohomish County can only have a single-family home on it. Everything that I showed you can't be done, can't be built, not allowed. On the other 40% of our land area, the demand is so intense and so high pressure that you never see housing like this in that multifamily zone land area. So this housing types, these duplexes, courtyard apartments, cottage housing, and live-work, they have no place. They are the missing middle. They are what's in between a single-family home and a mid-rise apartment or condominium complex. They are the forgotten housing types that American society, American culture has, for some reason, forgotten exist, doesn't support anymore. So I encourage you, the first thing that you can do, I encourage you to think about this. Think about if you want to see this in your community. Think about if you want to see, maybe not yourself, maybe it doesn't work for you, but maybe somebody else, maybe other families, other households living, allowed to have the choice to live in homes in configurations like this. These places are more affordable, just by the simple nature of them being smaller in square footage. So first, think about that and share it with your family, your coworkers, your friends. Share these ideas with them. Ask them what they think. Share this idea that housing can be more than a single-family home or a 250-unit, 5-story apartment building. There's lots of choices, lots of options that we can pursue that we don't have right now, that we don't allow. That's step one, because what you think really informs what will get built by builders. Step two is encourage your cities to adopt and support this kind of flexibility in its housing stock. Because as much as a builder wants to know what you think, that what you want and what your community wants to see, they won't build something that they can't get permitted, obviously. So contact your city leaders and ask them to think about this flexibility, to support this kind of flexibility in your community, in your neighborhood, in your zoning, in your land use. Previously, I worked for Governor Jay Inslee in constituent services. I made daily tallies, weekly tallies of the number of calls, letters, emails that we got on particular issues. And an issue that was on the fence could be swayed by a few hundred to 1,000 calls or contacts. That was considered a lot for us. And that's from a state of over 7 million people. Think about how many times people in your community contact the people that control these land use and permitting decisions, your city council, your mayor. How many people call and make their voice heard in your community? I can tell you the answer is very, very few. In the absence of hearing what people really think, your leaders are reluctant to change. What they do hear is some people saying, no change. I want no change here in my community. And I encourage you to be a voice of, I'm okay with some change. I'm okay with missing middle housing in our neighborhoods because it addresses the issue of this housing affordability crisis that we are engulfed in today. And it's not something that is outside of what my comfort zone, my comfort with what my community can be, can look like. I encourage you to call, to make your voice heard with your city council, with your mayor, because they will not do something unless you tell them it is okay. I work with city councils and mayors across Snohomish County, and I have heard time and time again that I've sold them on this idea. They believe it. They know it. They see it every single day in their lives and their jobs, that we have a housing affordability crisis in Snohomish County. But they know that they would be defeated in November at the ballot box if they even entertained this idea. They would love to act, but for the lack of support in their community. I encourage you to give them that support. Make your voice heard. Allow them that flexibility to act on this issue so that we can all have a community that we can all find a place to live in, no matter our income, no matter our occupation, no matter our background. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that sobering and also, hope directing input on, how we can potentially use our voices to speak for this missing middle. Do you have any initial reactions seeing it after seeing it?
Yeah, the numbers that I presented there actually got updated after the talk was recorded, and it's gotten worse. So there's the news: is the numbers have become more dire since I prepared those slides as more complete data came out. So it's an issue that people have asked me. Has COVID fixed it? Has COVID deflated the housing market? The answer is absolutely not. There's my first reaction.
Well, yeah. So when you think about the idea of no change being something that often people will say, I don't want my community to change. Typically they think, oh, it would get worse. Any change would make things worse. But I think you're arguing that change could be actually good. How can you help encourage someone who would prefer to have no change because they think things will get better to see that change actually really can make things better?
Mm-hmm. There's a couple different ways. Let's start with the biggest picture. If people say there's someone that says no change is good, but if you're simultaneously concerned about the state of our healthcare system, currently under immense stress during the pandemic, if you're concerned about education, if you're concerned about climate change because people are commuting and driving and burning fossil fuels more and more as they drive to and from work, that is the impact that we deal with from no change. So that right there is the benefit of change and having more housing diversity. Diversity itself is something that I would also touch on, that diversity is a good thing. Diversity in the people we know, in the experiences that we have in our communities, and having a diversity of housing stock encourages and allows for more diversity of all different types. And that is just a great thing. It's economic viability of our communities, that you have more ability to hire workers. If you're a commercial or a business owner in a city, it's easier to stay there, to make that community vibrant through the presence of your business, whatever it may be, because you can have workers working there instead of driving 2 hours away. An anecdote that I like to share is the economic development director, or excuse me, of economic development commission at a city told me that in his private business, he almost had to let someone go because they were driving in from 2 hours away, and because of traffic, sometimes they were 15 minutes early, sometimes they were 30 minutes late, and that was a real struggle for him. But he couldn't replace that person at the same time because he couldn't find anyone to live closer with the rate that he paid. And so he was thinking about leaving, about pulling up stakes with his business and leaving and taking his work elsewhere. And that's something that is also would be a great loss for the community if that happened en masse. And so it's a real benefit to be able to keep that economic vitality in our cities, in each individual city.
Mm-hmm. So we really need these changes to happen. It's actually a significant and poignant issue. Your talk talks about there being really clear home styles, American home styles, that have been forgotten and not used in this missing middle. Are there some communities, cities, or neighborhoods where progress has been made to create more of that missing middle housing stock? And can you describe some of those?
Yeah, there are. I mean, the pictures obviously come from somewhere. So you do find these housing types somewhere in the country. The challenge is that we don't see very much. So there's two steps, or there's 2 points to make. The first point is that we don't see very much. So as you build 12 units of, say, cottage housing, if you could quantify the demand for that housing type in the same time it takes to, build those 12 units, maybe demand has gone up by 48 units or something. So even though we build it here and there in little dribs and drabs, the demand is still far outpacing what we create. So that's a challenge, that even when we see it happen, you don't see prices really come down because there's just not enough. The demand is still too high. To more accurately to your point, where have we seen work happen on this? You really see in recent years, in the last 3 years, you've seen something come out of Minneapolis called Minneapolis 2040, where they really are trying to encourage in their single family zones, or allow, I shouldn't say encourage, they're just allowing in their single family zones anything up to a fourplex to be built at a time and way in place of the homeowners choosing. So it's not a mandate, it's not something that people are forced into, but it's just allowing people to change, allowing the community to change as and when they need to. Following that, the state of Oregon adopted a very similar measure, very similar in scope, of allowing duplexes, triplexes in their single family zones statewide. Again, not a mandate, it's not a requirement, it's allowing communities to change in very limited ways as the community sees fit, as the market will bear it. So those two efforts are very groundbreaking and really worth studying more closely. We don't have quantitative results of what they've delivered because housing takes a long time. Housing is a big ship. As this change in, say, Minneapolis happens, even though developers were aware of it beforehand, as it was adopted, it takes time to understand, what that change means for you as a developer, as a potential builder. It takes time for homeowners to want to take advantage of it. It takes time. This is something that we're in a big ship. Housing is a really big ship, and this is a really big issue that takes a long time to turn. But that's where I would look to for good examples.
Okay, so there are some examples of those changes taking place, and with the data will take a long time to come in. I think that's fair and understandable. But we're also moving the other ship, which is the kind of the cultural expectations and needs for additional housing. I think, I hope I'm not overstating it, but most people feel the pain of housing shortages, and they would like to see something done about it. From an economics perspective, can you share about how do these other alternative types of housing, these missing middle houses, fit from an economics perspective in terms of, you can imagine building a large scale complex would be more cost efficient, but, can you make a business case for this?
Sure.
Just anecdotal.
Sure. I mean, well, number one, right off the top, not all builders can build large or are really qualified or wanting to build large complexes, large structures. Certainly in Snohomish County, a lot of builders prefer, single family style construction, would be comfortable with cottage housing. So if you tell them, the most cost efficient way is to build, five-story condo buildings, they would say, well, that's not me. I can't do that. So, that really cuts down who can do that. So it's not all builders are the same. The second thing is, even if a five-story condominium building is more cost effective per square foot, that's putting all of your eggs in one basket. You're putting all of your development into a very tiny land area. And this is something where the City of Seattle Planning Commission actually mentioned this in a report they put out a couple of years ago, where they observed that 80%, if I recall correctly, 80% of the residential development in the city of Seattle goes into 5% of the land area. It's extraordinarily intense. And the Planning Commission said, well, why is that? Why does that make any sense? What about the rest of our residentially zoned land area? And so it's not really an economics argument, because maybe it is more cost efficient to build that. But I would contend that, neighborhoods should not be frozen in time. Neighborhoods should not perpetually be the same thing for time immemorial. And in fact, if you look back through the long scope of human history, you don't really see that ever being the case, where communities never change, that they're literally frozen in time through laws or other means. And, this is really where I would say it's important to allow our communities to change a little bit, to take some of the pressure off that 5% of the land area that's developed very intensely, because those units are priced at a very high premium because there's nowhere else to go. Nothing else is happening. So all that pressure, all that price escalation goes into that very tiny area, and affordability is completely lost. And the one thing my answer is getting a little long-winded, but one thing I'll say too is, think about the economics of building a duplex. If you can sell each of those duplex units for $300,000, but you can build and sell a single family home for, say, $550,000. That's the numbers in Snohomish County today. Your single family home, your small structure builders will find that an economically compelling argument, and they will make the same or a little more money, and so they will be incentivized to act, not through any government action or subsidy, but simply through the economics of that property. But also you'll find more affordability for the household that lives there, where instead of trying to find financing for $550,000, they need to find financing for $300,000, simply because the different configuration of the unit, the smaller square footage, and so on. So there's a lot of economic arguments to make there. So that's the brief overview.
Okay, great. So we've got a sense of improving the quality of our neighbors and neighborhood, in the sense that there's housing for the people who need housing, and it financially can make sense for the builders and for the neighborhoods. If you could look at each of the 4 different examples of the missing middle housing, could you just talk through each of those? You kind of did the duplex just there, but if you could talk through cottage housings or courtyard housing and the other items, that would be helpful to kind of just give us a sense of flavor for what it would look like for those to be added to what kinds of neighborhoods, and how might that take place, and just walk us through an example of that.
Yeah, and so the reason that I picked those photographs, and there's a credit in the bottom, so they're not from Snohomish County, but each one of those photographs I feel like I've seen in my time here in Snohomish County, and that's why I picked them, because they fit in seamlessly to a neighborhood that I've walked, that I've driven through in Snohomish County, and they wouldn't stand out. In particular, I like to call out the live work photograph, where I swear, even though it says it's from Omaha, Nebraska, I swear that picture is from downtown city of Snohomish in Snohomish County. It fits in perfectly. It is absolutely seamless with the downtown look and feel of the city of Snohomish. That's where I would want to see that kind of housing, because if I could wave a magic wand, it just fits in seamlessly. I was looking for pictures and photographs that really demonstrate these things can be made to match the existing look and feel of your community, while also providing internally a different floor plan, a different square footage, and a different price point for different families that would be completely seamless on the outside. Yeah,
I could see that exactly as you just described in Snohomish, and I think for many other areas, and for our listeners, I'm sure you can imagine whatever whether small city or neighborhood you're in, some of those craftsman style duplexes or various other kinds of housing. The courtyard housing was another example. Can you talk about an example where you see that?
That's something that I think I can talk about my own opinions at length, but I think what's more important is that people think about where they want to see it. And that's something where I could see, for example, courtyard apartments and housing, really small scale 5 to 10 unit apartment complexes or courtyard apartments in, say, Edmonds. I don't want to freak anybody out, but you could see that would kind of fit in certain neighborhoods in the city of Edmonds, and it wouldn't make anyone bat an eye, I don't think. I think, though, back to my original point, that this is really a discussion for the community to have the community come together and have this discussion. What looks right? What fits in well in our community that both meets the goal of affordability through size and also external character. That's really what I want to talk about, or what I want folks to take away from this is a conversation for you to have with your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers, and eventually your elected officials, and have that discussion, because we so often forget that that's even an option, and that those options can really fit in seamlessly without anyone even noticing.
You put your finger on something there when you said, I don't want to freak anyone out, but
Yeah.
right? Which is a great way to start whatever. Is like, okay, we're going to talk about something that may feel touchy to people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the quality of one's neighborhood is a very personal question. So how do you suggest people raising this kind of question, in a way that isn't contentious, but that instead helps people to kind of open their ears, and we've got 2 of these and only 1 of these, right? So if we're listening a little more than we are maybe voicing our panic or fear or worry, could it be that we might think or say before we use our voice, which is really what you want us to do, how do you help us process these changes in a way that will let us think creatively? You mentioned coming together as a group. What is an example of a kind of a community convening, especially in these days of COVID, when it's challenging to do that, but we are having town hall meetings and so on. Can just talk about what kind of atmosphere you think would lead to a productive conversation of this kind.
I think it's really about the venue, and I think each venue has a different approach. So take the faith community. Talk about how faith, whatever faith, interfaces with the idea of taking care of those that are less fortunate than us, and that's a perfect way to access this issue in a way that really makes sense. I think. Talk about economics. If you're part of an economic alliance, economic business council, anything like that, or a Rotary Club. How that impacts the community. The things that the Rotary Club talks about. Access it through that lens, and relate the issue to that particular venue. And that's something that I try to do in this talk. Given the time constraints, I can't do it as much as I'd like. But if you're talking about economics, let's talk about where our police and firefighters live, or public safety on that topic. Talk about where your grocery store clerks live. We sure enjoy having grocery stores that still have their shelves stocked and still have clerks that can check us out. Where do they live? Talking about that argument of economic vitality and viability, and also you can also access it through, where am I going to live? Where are you going to live? How do you live? Not getting too personal with the person you're speaking to. That's a great way to access it and make it human, make it real, and not fall victim to what so often happens, which is discussion of the other. And that's the thing that, if I could give advice on how to discuss this, it would be to not otherize housing and the people that live there, because housing is something that we all benefit from. No matter our economic status, no matter our occupation, our age, or anything about us, everyone lives in a place, in a way, in a home. And it's really important to remember that as we discuss this, more than anything, regardless of the venue, is don't otherize, humanize the people that we're talking about in a way that's appropriate for the venue.
Yeah, and so we'll have, of course, a lot of different points of view on this, right? There are people who will feel very strongly that, my neighborhood is the way I want it to be, and I want to make sure that the fences and the boundaries are crisp and tight. And others may be more receptive and interested in a more expansive view. But it sounds like everybody has a vested interest in there being a place for everyone who's needed by and within our communities for various services and so on. I do want to ask you, since you get to look at this conversation and listen to this conversation day in and day out, what are some things that you've heard about where some of those people are living now, grocery clerks and firefighters and so on? And can you give some examples of things that you've heard, perhaps related to Snohomish County?
Sure. What I can tell you, and I know this to be true, but this is still an anecdote. A few county staff, or a county staff person in the planning department, quit her job. It was a number of years ago. But the reason she quit her job was not because she was dissatisfied, or that she got a promotion, or that she, took a job somewhere else. It was because her husband was a Everett City firefighter. He still is. But the Everett City of Everett Fire Department, a number of their firefighters bought adjoining properties in Ellensburg, on the other side of the mountains. Ellensburg, and they commute over the mountains for their shift, and then they drive back, because it's more economical for them to live in Ellensburg and commute to Everett than it is for them to actually try and live in the county, in the community, the city that they serve, that they protect. So think about that when it comes to the issue of public safety. Worst case, earthquake. We know a lot of the bridges aren't going to be standing. More mundane, how nice would it be to have a firefighter living in your community, so that if, when emergency strikes, there's someone literally right there, even if they're not on duty, they're right there. We don't have that, because our first responders are having to move further and further away, simply because of economics, simply because of what they get paid. Translate that down to, jobs that pay less. It gets even worse. They live even further. Mount Vernon, Bellingham are not uncommon.
And for our listeners who are maybe out of area, Ellensburg to Everett is something like 130 miles one way. We're talking about a very substantial commute, or
over a mountain pass that is often snowed in.
Yes. So huge issues. I'd love to turn to our audience questions and answers in a moment.
Great.
But before we do, is there a, kind of imagining for a moment what it would look like for a group of people to come together and say something? What do you think the result of that might be? If, let's say, we had 100 people who came together and voiced their views in, let's say, a town the size of, one of our smaller cities in the area. Let's say we could pick city of Snohomish or another area of your choice.
That 100 people coming together with a common message of, please think flexibly, would have a huge impact. I have been to these city council meetings as part of my job. I've listened to marathon city council meetings, and the number of voices shared are 5, 10, 15. They're varied, as you would expect, but there's never a unified voice for any one thing, typically. So what you would see is, as I mentioned before, housing is a very big ship. It takes a very long time to change. If you got 100 motivated people together, if we waved a magic wand and made that happen, what you would see is that the discussion would be more productive at the council and the governmental level. What you would see is, instead of a 4.5 hour, I kid you not, a 4.5 hour city council meeting discussing whether or not the city should accept free money from the state to make a plan, where the vote was 4-3 in favor, and barely so. It was a very close 4-3 vote in that city after 4.5 hours of tortured discussion. You would see that discussion be much more productive. You would see a more unified voice in, yes, let's make a plan. Let's take free money from the state and move forward so that we can get to the really hard questions of what does the form, what does the shape and structure look like, what is appropriate for our neighborhoods. That's the tough question that we want to get to. But right now we're tripping over the tough question of, should we even have the discussion? In the short term, that's what those voices will allow us to get to. And it's tragic and it's somewhat disheartening to say that that's the best that we can hope for in the short term. But the fact of the matter is, that is where we are, is that we're trying to get over that starting line of, let's have the discussion. That's what we really need, because there are so few voices on one side or the other of the issue, that city councils, mayors never really have the discussion in the first place. And so that's really what we would hope to see. And after that, you would see the change really happen.
Okay. So let's turn to some of our listeners here. Tom on Zoom asks, with demand so high, how can we ensure that increased density will actually be affordable? Won't builders charge as much as possible?
That is a huge challenge. That's something that I often hear, in particular about tiny homes or cottage housing, that the price is not much more affordable. And right now, with demand so extraordinarily high, that's right. That is the case. Those units are priced at a premium because there is such great demand. In particular, I think of cottage housing as a great place for senior housing, as an example. But the demand from the senior population is growing in Snohomish County as the baby boomers age and seek those options. And so, yes, demand is extraordinarily high. We have very little of it. Competition is very fierce. And this is an example of where housing is something that takes a long time to change, because it takes a long time to actually meet that demand in a way that actually brings the price down. One other thing that I'll mention is, a Class A property, a newly built unit, is never one that I would describe as affordable, except in certain circumstances. But it's one where, after one or two tenants have lived there for 5 or 10 years, it's a little bit, there's a few little dings in the paint. Maybe you need to have it fixed up a little bit. Then it becomes more affordable. Just natural affordability is something that we really seek here. And, we often look for a silver bullet, something that, provides affordability right away. Mm-hmm. Right now, that's the emergency solution, intervention of public dollars. This solution, naturally occurring market rate, missing middle housing, is something that takes longer, but is more sustainable in providing affordability.
Okay. Yeah. You said change is important, not that it necessarily would be easy.
Yeah.
So, from Zoom, we have a question. What incentives can cities offer to encourage this type of development?
I think the first thing I would say is, an incentive. I tend to, in this discussion, there's a time and a place for incentives, but in this discussion, I would say it's less about incentives and it's more about stepping out of the way and allowing the market to work with slightly expanded guardrails, slightly expanded parameters in which it can operate, and then let people and the market make things happen on their own in individual parcels instead of a city guided approach. It's more, a city like guiding it parcel by parcel, neighborhood by neighborhood. Instead, say we're going to let change to a certain level happen, and then you guys can figure it out with certain guardrails to prevent abuse and so on. So, incentive is something that it's a bigger discussion, but I'm loath to get into a discussion about incentivizing, subsidizing, giving tax breaks, those sorts of things that often come up, or mandates even. That's something that I would hope to avoid in this, at least in the long term. In the short term, that's a different story. Do you think that answers the question?
Well, yes, it gets to it. Let's see. We have another question here. Apologies for the slight delay. I'm sorry.
No, let me answer the question a little more thoroughly. It's as you look for that, it's subsidy, intervention of public dollars in action is one thing. Yeah. Housing choice vouchers, low-income housing tax credits, programs and things like that. That should be a minority of the response. The market really is where a majority of the response will be. It doesn't have to be through building out to the mountains, though. It could be also allowing the market to build in our existing neighborhoods in limited ways that coincidentally along the way over time deliver affordability that is seamless with the rest of our communities.
Okay, sounds good. Ken on Facebook asks, how can rethinking not in my backyard thinking, hinging on owner self-interest in maintaining property values, be expanded to reflect neighborhoods enriched by enabling new neighbors with wider socioeconomic levels, differing income levels, and different cultures?
Mm-hmm. I want to key in on culture. That cultural diversity is something that personally I seek. I can speak for myself that I seek I find makes a neighborhood more valuable, more vibrant. And that's something where vitality, diversity does bring increased property values. And let me stress, if you build some missing middle housing, if we got cities to get on board with the idea of missing middle housing, you will not see your property values go down, not even a little bit. You might not see your property values skyrocket to the tune of 30, 40, 50% increases over a 5 to 10 year period. But your property value is not coming down. That's not the future, the fate of this region. What is if the economic tide goes out for Snohomish County, for the Puget Sound region, and that is a real risk. That's something that I really fear for the long-term future of this region. Anyone that plans on living here for more than a decade or two, if businesses find that it's not economical to live here, if Amazon decides that it's not economical to be here anymore, that they can actually work remote, that they can actually, it's makes sense for them economically to migrate somewhere else, to open HQ3 and close down HQ1 or whatever in Seattle, then your property value is really going to take a hit. The economics of this are, if the business and economic interest in this region leaves, we've seen what that looks like. It was called that sign in downtown Seattle that if the last person leaving would please turn off the lights, when the economy was in the tank and it was really tough living out here. That's not a time that I think most people want to go back to. And so, in this way, in allowing some variety, some diversity in our housing stock, that people that live here, so that we preserve the economic vitality of the region, in a way, in the long term, you're really securing your economic future in the long term, because Amazon will stay, Microsoft will stay, Expedia will stay, and new businesses that support and serve them will locate here, will stay here. So it's challenging, but if you take a look at it through that lens, I think that's persuasive. And also, again, make it small scale too for people. Where are you going to retire to? If you say, and so this is a bit of a divergence from Ken's question, but say you are a senior, you are in your 40s. You'd think, I was born and raised here. I've got a house here. This is great. I've got a front and backyard, and I would like to retire here. If you meet someone that fits that description, ask them, where do you plan on retiring to? where do you plan on downsizing your house to when you don't want to maintain a roof, the siding, the front and backyard, and all of the things that go along with a single family detached home? Where will you live? Because right now, and for the last 3 years and into the foreseeable future, seniors are struggling immensely with the fact that they are functionally locked into their homes that they can't or don't want to take care of anymore. And that's a real risk. And I think that's something that, the NIMBYs, folks that say like no change here, no new development here, no new units here, they will benefit from this. Everyone will benefit from having a variety of housing choices so that as your life changes, as your circumstances change, you have somewhere to go and you can still stay in your community, close to your family, close to your support network, your healthcare provider, and. There are a lot of arguments that really make it beneficial for folks to allow and accept change.
Wow, I really appreciate how willingly you're asking all of these really tough questions. And I got to hand it to you. It's not easy to face these questions about where am I going to live when I retire, and it's understandable that these are difficult. And so there may be a need to pause and reflect before having a strong view.
Absolutely.
From Zoom, someone is asking about most of the middle housing adds density to suburban communities. And it's the kind of density that they tend to shy away from, as it reminds suburban communities of problems of nearby large cities. How do you counter that argument?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. First, it is depending on the location of your community. Say Stanwood. Let's take Stanwood versus Linwood. Two very different circumstances for those two municipalities. Two very different approaches based on where those cities are. That's number one. So everything is different. The approaches that you take that you will zone for, allow for, are different. So that's number one. Let me think. Sorry.
That's fine. I
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, just to make sure.
Absolutely. So it's really about how suburban environments that may fear appearing to embrace too much new density, right? And for you to not jump to an answer, I appreciate it. That's refreshing. So many times it's like, I've got an answer for that, and it just got shoved down your listening ear. No,
it's tough.
I don't know is a legitimate answer too.
No, there are many answers. There are many answers, and this is my answer. That's the important thing to recognize, and this is why conversation is so important, because I don't have the answer. That's something that we all find, we all formulate. But so I'm still going to take a crack at answering it, and that is take Linwood, where Linwood developed as a bedroom community supporting King County. That is Linwood's history. Period. I feel that that's pretty indisputable, in spite of the cultural strength that Linwood has developed since then. But nevertheless, Linwood used to allow a chicken coop on your property. That was great. Linwood said, yep, do a chicken coop. This was back in the early 1900s, and things changed. And now Linwood is a suburban community. Change happens. And that's the challenge that we deal with, is that, cities do grow and expand. Areas do densify, as economics really is what drives the migration of people from place to place. Opportunity really makes people move from place to place, and change does happen as a result of that. And I mentioned this in, I think, one of the earlier questions, that we really don't see a place in time in history where change has been stopped, that change has been just frozen out of the equation, that a place remains the same in perpetuity. In small and in big ways. That's something that is, I think, American culture uniquely became quite enamored with in the post-war period. This is where I'd really point to this idea beginning that the suburban neighborhood expanded so fast, didn't develop organically. And as a result, we really got used to the idea that neighborhood should never change. Nothing new should ever happen here. And that's pretty unusual when you think about it. And what I'm talking about, what I'm encouraging people to think about, is the little changes, the things that really don't bring the big city to your neighborhood, but still bring some change. Because a way that I've heard it summed up is that no community should change drastically, like turning into, you open your curtains one day and say, oh crap, the city's here. No change should happen that dramatically, but neither should a community be prohibited from changing forever.
Right. I mean, developing a more subtlety around what kind of
Exactly.
change can mean. That it change is automatically, catastrophic and overwhelming is not a given. That there can be small changes, even those changes that might sweeten a neighborhood, sweeten and diversify vary in variety of different
Absolutely.
kinds of ways. So let's have more
Absolutely.
range around that. Also thinking a little bit on the density question, parking is a common issue raised when you have more units of this type.
Absolutely.
How have other communities dealt with the parking pressures that missing middle housing could
That's
create?
absolutely, parking is something where I have tried repeatedly to truly get a handle on parking, and that is a field of academic study and professional study all by itself. A study by the county posed the question, and boy, smart people much smarter than me tried to grapple with it, and I saw how sticky that problem is. I know that's a really tough problem. One thing that I will say though is that proximity to other modes of transit is much easier when you are in an existing city. Instead of expanding suburbia out to the east, as that's the only direction we can really go in Snohomish County is out east towards the mountains, that really locks people into the car culture that America has grappled with for generations at this point. Um, so parking is a challenge, but I think that other disciplines, transportation, mass transit not being the least of them, is dealing with that and trying to grapple with that too. And that's where I would want to bring in experts from community transit, sound transit to
Mm,
talk about that, how you
mhm.
can work around that. And the presence of, or rather density gets more sensible, more and more sensible the closer you are to transit, because for good reason, because it's easier to not have a car, to only have one car, to only require one parking space per unit instead of two, two and a half, or what have you. Um, that gets a lot easier to solve the more you allow density closer to transit.
Okay. Jim on Facebook is asking, the 1991 State Growth Management Act was
Mhm.
designed to force growth into urbanized areas and establish growth targets.
Yep.
Why hasn't the GMA kept up with the growth?
I
That's
haven't.
a deep, long
I'm
question.
actually, it's not. I'm very
Oh,
glad that Jim asked that question, because so there is a study from the Department of Commerce that I advise everyone listening to go take a look at, called the HART study. It's Housing Affordability Response Team Task Force. It's from the Department of Commerce in 2017, AHAB, AHAB report. In 2017, it identified one of the leading reasons that the GMA has struggled is because the GMA, while it successfully constrained sprawl, it never required cities to take action. So compare the housing elements of the Growth Management Act to the transportation elements, where if you say we will do X, Y, and Z in transportation and you fail to meet those targets that you've set out for yourself, the municipality is penalized. If you fail to do that in housing, if you say we will do A, B, and C, but we only do A, no problem. Try again next year. And this is something that I agree with, but I didn't identify. This is the Department of Commerce analyzing their own program that the Department of Commerce generally manages. Then they said in housing, there are effectively no teeth for the housing elements in the Growth Management Act. And that is why. So you successfully constrained sprawl as the Growth Management Act was intended, but it never required that cities address what happens, where all of that sprawl pressure, that's demand for sprawl, goes. And so cities have basically been allowed to punt.
mm,
And in Snohomish County, just to close the loop on this, you see that growth targets for unincorporated Snohomish County are way above where they should be. But for the most municipalities, growth targets are way below where they should be, because the cities are allowed to, in effect, miss their growth targets and hand that off to the county, who really has to respond to that in the unincorporated areas and the urban growth areas. Um, and so that's really how the GMA has played out. So it was successful halfway. Now we need to get it successful all the way.
okay, great. Another question. Marty on Zoom asks, how does this address homelessness in Snohomish County? Not all have a home.
Absolutely. This is something where this does not directly address homelessness. It's a couple steps away from that, but it has a downstream effect on homelessness. I work very closely with many people who do directly respond to the issue of homelessness that is growing and at a crisis level in Snohomish County. It was before COVID, it's getting worse now. This is something where you have you have more people that are housing stable where a missed paycheck, a car accident, a death or sickness in the family, or I don't know, a little pandemic that puts you out of work for 4 months doesn't lead to you becoming homeless, I should say. So this has downstream effects on the homeless system or provision of homeless services to prevent people or bring people out of homelessness. Also, it has one step down from kind of missing middle housing is subsidized housing, rental assistance, things like that, income restricted housing. It takes the demand off of those properties where, you're expecting your housing authorities and other actors in the space to now expand the coverage of who they support up to people that make $70,000, $80,000. Of course, they can't. Their resources are stretched far too much for that, and they triage the issue down to the most that need the most at risk. But even that isn't really able to cover everyone, and you have more and more people slipping through the cracks. And so taking pressure off of the existing providers, the existing systems, by allowing the market to create a house, a unit, a place that is affordable to someone making $50,000 to $70,000 a year annual in their household income will take the pressure off. It'll take the pressure off so the existing systems can respond more effectively to the growing crisis that we have.
Wow. So you have helped us to really open up so many doors on these questions and encouraged us to use our voices. And while you haven't solved all the problems, you've raised how important it is to start listening and addressing them. Is there anything you want to leave us with as we kind of come to a close in our conversation today?
Yeah, so I tried to connect this issue to economics, to our healthcare and education system, to climate change, transportation, ourselves, our future as, a retiree that wants to live here and many other things. But and I think those are all very important issues because if we fail to address this, we will pay for failure to address this, whether it's in charity hospital care, if it's incarceration rates. Funding for the city or county jail comes out of public tax dollars after all. So you will pay one way or the other as the ills of housing unaffordability go unaddressed. But I want to set that aside because the real value that I see in having this discussion with yourself, your family, your friends, your coworkers, and eventually your city and your community is really the value and need we have for common decency with one another. This issue will help address the fraying social fabric that we see on the news every day today. This is something that really gets to the core of who and what we are as a society and as a culture, and failure to address that will just allow things to fray that much more. And again, it comes back to decency to one another. It comes back to the dream that we all have of a prosperous future and maintaining that for ourselves, our friends, our family, and our coworkers. And that's what we're talking about. That's what's at stake. And that's why it's really important to make your voice heard and to think about this, just to think about it, just to talk about it. Just send a quick email, have a quick conversation. You don't need to go join the picket lines talking about housing because you'll be the only person out there on the picket line. But making your voice heard through short, easy communications really helps us maintain that common decency to one another that we all benefit from in some way, and really makes our community special and our country great.
Well, thank you so much for your decency and your willingness to explore these challenging topics and give a lot of insight into how things are going and where they've been and where they could go in the positive direction. I'm afraid we're not able to get to all the other questions that there are, and I really hope we can have a continuation of this conversation online, and that each of you who are listening will have a chance to use your voice and make sure it gets heard. So thank you again. I'm Phil Klein for TEDx Noel Libraries. Thank you so much, Chris Collier. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll see you again soon.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
TEDx Noel Libraries 2020 has been made possible through the generous support of corporate and community-based organizations who believe in the power of ideas and information. We'd like to thank these organizations for partnering with us. Coastal Community Bank, serving the financial needs of customers throughout Western Washington. Coastal Community Bank, where community is not just their middle name, it's how they do business. Community Transit of Snohomish County, providing public transportation alternatives and solutions which help people get from where they are to where they want to be. Overdrive, always innovating to help libraries transform by providing digital content such as ebooks, audiobooks, magazines, and video for public libraries. Washington Energy Services, providing heating, cooling, and other service solutions to help Puget Sound residents save energy and live better. And our founding partner, the Snow Owl Libraries Foundation, committed to mobilizing people and resources to expand the reach of Snow Owl Library services, promote civic engagement, and foster a lifetime of learning.